Hi, I'm Catherine.
I'm Teresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. We are joined by Marissa Guarriello. I had the pleasure of seeing a presentation that Marissa did with some colleagues for the NAFME Eastern Division Conference about the Creative String Orchestra. And it was awesome. And I knew after listening to them talk that we needed to start having some conversations here for the YouTube channel. So Marissa, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Can you maybe introduce yourself, tell us about your background, your current teaching role, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So, like Teresa said, my name is Marissa Guarriello. I'm currently a 6 through 12 orchestra teacher for the Penn Ridge School District, which is just north of Philadelphia by about an hour. However, this is actually my last year or a few weeks actually in the classroom. I was accepted to start my PhD at Indiana University out in Bloomington. So I'm excited to be making that shift very soon. However, I'm a Penn State graduate and I did my master's degree at the Eastman School of Music. I also, like you mentioned, have quite an affiliation with F-Flat Books, and that's where we released the Creative String Orchestra. I released some other books with them as well, and I'm also a co-host of a podcast for F-Flat as well called Musicast. So that's kind of what I'm up to right now.
Awesome, and congrats about the PhD program. That's really exciting.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So you are an advocate for improvisation in orchestra classes. Can you tell us more about that and how have you noticed this affecting and empowering your students?
Sure. So I think that piece of my teaching really came to be not terribly easily. And I think this is kind of an important thing to mention when I talk about being an advocate for creativity in the orchestra classroom, because I was raised to be a performer. So it was all about technique and the performance and just being the best, getting to move up in, chairs in orchestra or, cranking out that perfect solo. And people started chipping away at me in my undergrad, talking about things like alternative techniques or alternative music styles. And it didn't really interest me, kind of had an attitude that it was subpar. And then I got out into the classroom and you quickly realize that, if you were brought up as a performer or a product-based kind of musician, as a teacher, that's not the majority of your students. It's your high flyers, but the majority of students aren't going to go into performance. And so I started thinking about the whole process a little bit more, and my philosophy started to change. My first job was down in Texas, actually. So they're a very product-based state and system with their UIL and their competitions and all that kind of stuff. So I quickly realized that the kids could do what I was asking them to do, but they didn't know why they were doing it. And it was very frustrating to me. They didn't really know anything about the composers. They didn't know anything about phrasing or, they just did what we told them to do. And so I started working with them on that, but that wasn't necessarily seen as good by my colleagues though either. It was kind of seen as a waste of time. So I came back up to Pennsylvania and I went to a conference. I met Sarah Gulish. Actually, she was presenting at a conference and I was just blown away. And kind of all of these little pieces from my undergrad and my student teaching, which was with Matt Schaefer, one of the co-authors of the book. And I went, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is really what we should be doing more of. So I went, I need to do this, but I had no idea how. I wasn't raised to do it. No one taught me to do it. Some people were telling me to, but I really didn't know how. So I kind of had to put my ego aside and say, listen, I'm going to try this with my kids and I'm going to make some mistakes, but we're going to do it. So that's a lot of background. basically to say that I had a huge shift in my philosophy throughout the first few years of my teaching, which was not all students are going to grow up to go into music or performance or whatever. And therefore, I don't think we need to educate them as such. And when you make that shift in your philosophy, you think about the time that you have allotted in your classroom and the expectations of the community you're in. And you say, okay, it takes time to do creative activities, but is it worth it? And in my case, I think it is. So that's kind of how I got to where I am. And the effects on the students, I think, has been really phenomenal because, again, it takes up time in your classroom to do it, but then you take everything that you teach your students and it applies back to their performance. So we're still putting on wonderful concerts that the community enjoys and the students are learning from. And, but when you work on a composition or you work on creativity, you pull in, this is what you did in your composition and this is how you wanted it to sound, let's say for phrasing. And so you put these dynamics in and you made these choices. Well, what's this composer doing in the music that you're now playing? And how, you make those connections with the students and then everything kind of just all clicks together and the kids make those associations and it just locks in, and I think they appreciate what they're doing more and they enjoy what they're doing more and they kind of have this bigger world view of their music.
Yeah. Can you give us an example what this might look like in your classroom? Pick a grade level or an order.
Yeah. There's so many different things. And one of the things that I love about doing creative activities in my classroom is that I can be creative as the teacher. Oftentimes we're going to try this today. So, one of the examples that I really love is something that I have, titled mostly for the book called Musical Pictures. And all it is you pick a category with students and colors. All right, we're all going to pick a different color and you're going to take the next 10 minutes. It can be solo work or in pairs or small groups, whatever. And you're going to pick a color and you're going to come up with a composition, a phrase, 2 phrases, 10 seconds, 30 seconds that represents that color. So yellow's a really easy one, especially when spring comes around. So, play me a song that sounds bright and sunny and happy. And then you can have the conversations about major and minor, slow versus fast, articulation, alternative techniques. The first time I did it, it took basically the whole lesson time, which in my district is about 45 minutes with the younger guys. High school, first time they did a little bit quicker, but now I can use it as a warm up. So, kids are taking 5-10 minutes. They're performing it for their classmates. It builds a really lovely community of support within my classes. And it just kind of gets their creative juices flowing before you do dive into other work. So, colors are really popular. Animals are really popular. Seasons, subjects. We did one with all different school subjects. So that's a really fun one. And that's really just off the cuff, but it can go all the way up to like my high schoolers do full blown compositions. So it really ranges and it's based on the kids you have in front of you and the time you have and the grade, all that kind of stuff.
What do you do if the kid says, I don't know how, I can't, or that, there's always a couple that have that, well, I can't do it, or I don't.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well, I maybe this is too short of me. I basically don't give them a choice. I tell them they have to at least try, encourage them. But I think the thing that really helps them jump into it is there's no right answer. Our kids are so determined to find the right answer because testing, right? We prep our kids to be testers nowadays. And but how, I don't know anything about composition. I don't know chord structure. I don't know anything. I don't care about that right now. I want you to express yourself. So I think that's really what empowers them to kind of just show me what they think in this moment, and anything they give me is going to be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about it is it's personalized, right? Like they get to should have so much expression in it, but also like the conversations around their choices as composers. So that for that one kid who's like, I'm not a composer, I don't know, when they start to realize like, oh, if so and so did it and they just said, I made it fast because I thought the color was, then it's like that helps them to see like, oh, this isn't like this thing I can't do. I can do this. I just need to switch my mindset that I can do this. This is,
Yeah.
So.
And I think the other piece of it is that in general, it doesn't really matter what we're talking about. I'm pretty honest with my students. I don't try to like hide who I am as a human being. And I don't consider myself particularly creative. I don't consider myself a composer. So oftentimes I'll do the activity with the students. And I mean, so many times that what the kids are giving me are, is so much better than what I came up with too. So if I'm upfront with them about kind of my self-perceptions, even if it's, not always the greatest thing, they're like, oh, well, if she's not a composer and she can do it, then I think I'll be okay too. So.
That's so important to model that, and for them to see you grow as well, right?
Yeah, I've learned right alongside my students with this one because, like I said, at the beginning of my career, this was not how I even thought. So it's been a big switch and learning curve. Yeah.
And I imagine you see like the kids that you started doing this with in 6th grade, for example, that you now have maybe in high school. It must be such an amazing progression to watch them grow like that.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. Just a quick little side note story. One of my students is going actually to Westchester for performance next year. And he's a drummer, but he's always on GarageBand. He's always doing arrangements. During the COVID shutdown, I would get videos like once a week of, hey, Miss G, I put this together. And he's a drummer, but he's also a violinist. So he would layer all of these things together. And we actually recently interviewed him for our podcast. And I said, you're really into this. Like, where did you start? And he said, well, it was here at school, actually, like when we did the composition project. I didn't even realize like note flight was a thing. I didn't realize this was something I could really do. And so now he does all of this stuff all the time, 3 or 4 years later after he first did it. And I didn't even realize that's where he started. I thought he had been doing this all the time. So, I mean, yeah, in my middle schoolers, you start them young. They're not so afraid in 6th grade. So by the time they hit high school, it's like, yeah, we do this all the time. No big deal. So, yeah.
And that story, I think, is exactly why we do this. I mean, one of my big goals is I don't want the kids to just see themselves as musicians when they're in my band room. I want them to be able to feel like they can make music anywhere at any time in their life, and that's always something that they have. So to be able to think like you gave that to that student, that's awesome.
I mean, he's particularly talented, but I actually think he's going into performance, but I think he has a bright future, like as a producer or as some kind of creative person in music, because I think that's really what turns him on, and he didn't even realize that until a few years ago. So I'm excited for him.
Absolutely, you should be. That's great. So I think we kind of talked about some of the unexpected benefits. Was there anything else that you noticed that came out of your students from doing these kind of products and projects?
Yeah, I think I briefly mentioned it. The classroom culture shift was exciting to see. It was something I had hoped for, but when you make a kid stand up, and I think we talk about it a lot in terms of singing, singing is very personal. It's your instrument, comes from your body. They get nervous. It's you're putting yourself out there. And I was nervous because I knew the same thing was going to come from this. However, I've tried it a few different ways, and the most successful I've found, at least with my current students, is just to have the kids stand up and do their thing. And everyone just is happy and cheers, and they're excited kind of no matter what. And it's just built this really great classroom culture. And when we do these activities, it goes, maybe I'll do one once a week, or sometimes depending on the time of year, it's once a month or whatever, but they'll talk to each other. Hey, you did this thing last time, and I don't know how you did that. Can you show me? Because I want to put it in what I'm doing now. And it just created this sense of collaboration and support for one another that is really nice to see. And I think the other big one is, especially for something like the warm-ups, musical pictures, or where I give the students a choice of any kind. I can often get a gauge on how they're doing that week, that month, that day, based on their choices. So going back to colors, you get to pick the color today. Show me a composition. They all break out. And as I'm walking around, kind of just hearing what they're doing, so-and-so picked red. They picked black. That, why'd you pick this? What's going on in your life that this is the way you feel today? And sometimes it's just, I like black, or I want to do a crazy song. But sometimes it's, my math test didn't go so well last period and I'm not feeling great. Or, something happened at home and I'm angry. So that's kind of one of the other unexpected things I got out of some of this as well.
That's really neat.
Yeah. So what advice would you give someone who wants to start to do more improvisation in their ensemble, but maybe feels like they were like you at the beginning, where you were kind of brought up in a different environment?
Yeah. I think one of the best pieces of advice that was given to me, her name was Patty Begg. I think she's close to retirement, but I think she's still in State College School District, was, and it sounds rude, but she meant it in the most loving way. Just get over yourself. She's an elementary general teacher, and I was like this rigid orchestra person trying to student teach in a K-5 classroom. She's like, you just need to go have fun. Like you're a fun human being. Just show that to the kids. It doesn't have to be perfect every time. And I took that, and at first I was kind of like, wait, what? But I internalized it, and thank God she said that to me, because it's a piece of everything I do now. Like I'm a goober with everything I do. And it's kind of that same thing with improvisation. Embrace the fact that it's probably not going to be perfect. You're learning alongside the kids. It does take looking at kind of your self-efficacy, and you're going to have to be a risk taker in what you're doing with the kids. It's not always going to be perfect, but start somewhere, start anywhere. And if it doesn't work, do your research and try again. I'm not going to lie and say that because I wrote a book, I still do everything perfectly, or that I even follow exactly what I do in the book. It's just, start somewhere and keep going and changing and growing. And hopefully at some point you get to see these cool things come out of it. And chances are you will.
It's definitely a process, and there will be days when it doesn't go well. Right. Pivot and move on. Right.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
So speaking of like pivoting, let's look at this last school year, which has been very, very different for many of us, which, although maybe in the orchestra world, it hasn't had quite as many impacts as band. I'm not really sure, but is there anything that you learned or tried during this really unusual year that you think you're going to keep doing in the future? I know you're moving on to a PhD program, but just thinking about teaching.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are reflecting on this year because it gave us a chance to reflect on what we were doing in our classroom and gauging whether or not something was important or as necessary as we claimed it to be. And kind of along those lines, I think the community did the same. So I think people are anxious to go back and see live performances. Don't get me wrong, but we did a lot of creating. We did a lot of learning about the behind the scenes of music. And I think, again, that was unknown to so many students, that music had this, historical background, or we talked a lot about music as a language. I think students often forget that we're saying something through our music. It's, often why we're doing it or why it was composed. But a lot of what we were doing with these creative activities, we continued because they were nice to do online. So there was a really cool little thing that I'd love to do on a larger scale, where we have an orchestra Instagram and the students love it. It's actually kind of hilarious. But while we were shut down, I gave my students a day to take over, and a pair of students took over together one day, but of course we were in quarantine, so they were in separate places. And one kid would record something, and then the other kid would respond to it on the story, and then the other kid would respond back. And so they were just like making stuff up. But if you watched the whole story, it was a complete song. It was really cool. So we took that and we turned that into a project. We also did a lot of editing, garage band work. Like for this winter, we released an album instead of some kind of pre-recorded concert. So we talked a lot about editing and creativity in those ways and what you can do. We also, I guess, to go with that, we built a recording studio because we're seeing this uptick in creativity in our students. We're seeing it now in the ensemble classrooms, but we're also seeing it in sorry, my dog's barking. I don't know if you can hear, but we're seeing it also in things like piano and guitar class, and kids are itching to share their work in those areas as well. So we built a recording studio, and that's going to stay with us for sure. So yeah, I mean, there's just bits and pieces of this year that I think we would love to keep and bring in a little bit more. But again, we have to have those conversations of time and expectations and what's best for the students and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how it all pans out. And while I hope my colleagues, who I'm very close with, keep me in the loop moving forward, I'd love to see what they decide to do. I probably won't see much of it come to fruition in real time anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. There's so many things that you said that I know people will want to look up and so how can we connect with you? Give us some places to look.
Yeah, sure. So you can always reach me on my personal email, which is mguarriello47@gmail.com. I'm happy to share that publicly. And like I said, I am affiliated with F-Flat Books, so fflat-books.com, and you can get my contact information there as well. You can also find our Instagram page. The podcast one is @musicast20. And that's the one that I will be continuing as I transition, because the Penn Ridge one I will not have control over anymore. But if you want to see some of the creative activities those kids are doing, it's the @Penn Ridge Orch, ORCH. And there's a lot posted there. Also, a Twitter by the same handle is available. But yeah, those are the main places you can find me.
And we'll be sure to put links to all of those so people can find, especially
Awesome.
to your book. And I would love to see some of the things on Instagram. That just sounds really fun.
Yeah, thanks. It's kind of fun to share it out and celebrate the kids on our social media. So
they should definitely have that opportunity. So good. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you being here, taking the time and talking to us about this, and for everything that you're doing for your students. So.
Oh, of course. It's my pleasure both to be here and work with the kids.
This is part 1 of a 3-part series on creativity and improvisation in ensembles. Please join us next time for part 2 with Matt Schaefer. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you subscribe below.
And follow us on social media. I'm @musicalteresa.
I'm Singing Finch 1.
And you can follow the hashtag #PassTheBatonBook.